Thank you, Governor. Thank you, members of the committee, for asking us to come in here today. I commend you and I commend Governor Otter for forming this committee. It's very important that INL, I have trouble with it, like Governor Anderson remembering if it's INL, INEL, or whatever, but I guess not INEL, and certainly is the bedrock of economic development in East Idaho. And it's an extremely important employer, and I welcome the chance to reiterate part of my goals when I was negotiating the agreement, that economic activity over there be augmented and improved as a result of our agreement. It's been a key part of our economy for a long time. Well, I agree with a lot of what Governor Anders said. I think that we should hold tough on the deadlines and impose the fines if they don't meet them, because, as he mentioned, political events and political attitudes have allowed us to put off deadlines for many years. We can't afford to do it anymore. Yucca Mountain was certainly the best possibility for our repository. The President, in all deference, closed that down for purely political reasons. There were a team of scientists or scientific people who selected Yucca to begin with as the best place in the United States for the storage. The President closed it down for his own re-election purposes, with some casino operators wanted done, and formed a committee to look for a new site with this explicit instructions they were not to consider Yucca Mountain, which I think is still a tremendous mistake. If we can maybe get a new president, we'll try to open up Yucca Mountain again. Well, anyway, as Governor Anders mentioned, the time goes right by, and I think we had 40 years when we signed the agreement to reach the deadlines for removal of all the rods, and 17 of those years have passed. There's 23 left, and time slides right on by. I was out in the cemetery over the Memorial Day and looked at my dad's grave and was amazed to bring it to my mind that he was born 120 years ago, which is over half the lifespan of our country. And my granddad was born before the Civil War. But anyway, the time passes right on, and although they lived a pretty good age, both of them, they're not going to live as long as I'd need to see this agreement consummated, totally consummated. I'd have to be 108 years old when 35 rolls around. I don't think that's going to happen. Anyway, I'll get to my prepared remarks. In the days of Frank Church and long after, Idaho's INEL, along with other federal installations such as Hanford, Washington, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee, served as veritable waste dumps for the nation's dangerous and bulky radioactive waste. Much of it came as a result of munitions manufactured in World War II and the Cold War which followed. When 3 Mile Island blew up, the INEL received the debris and the fuel rods, and later under my agreement transferred them to safely stored materials. There were a wide variety of other byproducts of different radioactive capacities. The Navy had always used the INEL as its waste depository, it's never had a different one, and had reprocessed some of its fuel rods, creating high-level radioactive waste. As the governor mentioned, we're behind on finishing up on handling some of those products, but most of them have been handled very, very timely. Our elected officials had long protested the dangerous exposure of storing these materials and had been promised time and again that this was a temporary situation and all objectionable radioactive items would be removed. Governor Anders decided that these promises were worthless and proclaimed that he would stop importing used fuel rods. A federal court took up the matter, and they said we had to take the rods, but the court also granted a temporary injunction and decreed that an environmental impact statement must be prepared before any shipments were resumed. Naval shipments were included in this ban, although the Navy had never taken them anywhere else. The order included a provision that in the event of an emergency declared by the Secretary of the Navy, naval shipments would be allowed. When I took office in January 95, the U.S. Navy was preparing to send 8 shipments of fuel, which is 8 rods, to the INEL. Governor Anders had refused to allow these shipments. Admiral DeMars, who the governor just referred to, and other naval officials called on me. They expressed their hope that a new administration could engage in a new dialogue. I assured them I was willing to try it. The Secretary of the Navy had declared an emergency, as was called for in the injunction. The Admiral described the emergency. He said sailors could not be sent home within their 6 months of sea duty because of nuclear congestion at the ports. And he said that port facilities would become dysfunctional because of excess shore storage of nuclear rods. Other factors were mentioned. I accepted his arguments and agreed to take the 8 rods and a total of 19 in a short period of time. In return, he approved the negotiation of a larger settlement proposal for all of INL's nuclear waste problems. This was the foundation of the agreement which we established. But public indignation at my actions was overwhelming. I was held in high disfavor, and it was really something. The people were shipping me used pop cans. I can't remember what the trash deal was. They were sending me loads of trash because I was getting trash into Idaho. Movie stars were coming to the courthouse staff, Bruce Willis, to tell me what a poor public servant I was. And newspaper, I remember at the Statesman, I had to go downstairs to get it. I was living in a 3rd floor apartment. And go down and buy me a newspaper, and the Statesman had to expand their issue in order to get all the letters in saying what a bad guy I was. So it was a very bad period of time for me. But we entered into the negotiations. They were long and intense. The environmental impact statement called for 1,956 shipments to come in by 2035, which included about 700 of commercial waste. And Larry Craig, you'll remember that in the middle of those negotiations, or toward the end of them, each of the congressmen called me and told me we better get that because Congress was going to make it immaterial to us what we were doing. They were going to force us to take this. So we did the best we could with the negotiations, and I think we got a pretty decent one. We negotiated this down to some 1,150 shipments, none of which could be commercial waste. And perhaps more importantly, various cleanups were mandated and deadline, such as safely processing the 3 Mile Island debris, which now comprises 30% of our stored rods. I didn't realize it was that much. And they're out now all in solid form. Eliminating highly radioactive liquid waste. As the governor said, that's not completed. But most things have been completed very well. Converting liquid cooled fuel rods to solid waste. That's on time. Removal of all our transuranic waste. As the governor mentioned, there were some difficulties involved, but they've got it all, or it's going to be out in a short period of time. It's exceeding the deadline. For the most part, these duties have been executed completely and on time. There are some left that are not. In conjunction with the agreement, I obtained a modification of the specifications for the Yucca Mountain, Nevada proposed federal storage. At the time when the agreement was being discussed at first, the storage was not allowed to take military waste because of the capacity of it. The people back in Washington agreed to change the specs to allow it to take naval rods if we went ahead with our agreement. To cap it all off, the agreement called for all spent real fuel rods to be shipped out of Idaho by 2035. I agree with Governor Anders completely. We must hold by the timelines. At the time of the agreement, Yucca Mountain had been selected and preparations for its opening were underway, and they spent $2 or $3 billion in getting ready. Well, they hadn't at that time, but finally. A penalty of $60,000 a day was to be imposed if deadlines are not met, which is over $20 million a year. President Obama, in fulfilling a campaign promise to casino operators, has declared that Yucca Mountain will not open. And I've already said that's a crestly political move. but I'm hoping that that will be considered in the future by someone who is more objective about it. There are those who believe we should modify the agreement. I want to say that I don't regard it as sacred. It had no divine inspiration. It was prepared to solve an intense Idaho problem. If it can be improved, I certainly have no objection. But Idahoans are fearful that our underground aquifer could become polluted. I share that fear. It's a vast prime source of water for a large portion of Idaho and beyond. There has been considerable earthquake activity in the region. The possibilities of contamination are real and must be addressed if we allow our storage of nuclear materials to continue indefinitely. There was an attempt to repeal my agreement, which went to the ballot. As the governor said, the document was sustained by over 60% of the voters. But most of the other 40% didn't want it either. They thought it was way too lenient. I think if you'd asked the question, do you want any storage over there, you wouldn't have got 5% of the vote. I don't know how that would be today, but there are not very many Idahoans, I don't think, are willing to take the risk of our aquifer. Therefore, I'm not critical of those who propose changes in the agreement, but I don't believe it's feasible or advisable to accept large quantities of nuclear waste or commercial waste. I believe all of us in present and past public office must demand that the question of storage of our nation's nuclear waste be settled. Our agreement is nearly halfway toward its deadline. We're totally stymied. Commercial nuclear generation sites may accept storing their own waste forever. They're used to it. They get paid for it. However, they also assess them something to pay for it. But they might take care of their own, but that wouldn't take care of ours. We have a large quantity of waste there already. And yes, we'd collect some hefty fines if they don't move it out, but large quantities of that waste, those fuel rods would still remain there if we don't meet the deadlines or find a repository for it. The INEL is one of Idaho's best employers, maybe the best. Much of the 6,000-member staff has been devoted to carrying out the terms of the agreement. I think they've done a really good job. Most of these chores are coming to an end, and we're going to need new projects to retain the vitality of this important institution. I supported, and the governor has opposed, the slight modification of my agreement to allow a small amount of commercial waste to come in for research. This was offset by a reduction in future incoming non-commercial waste accepted under the agreement. This project, as I mentioned, there are about 1,150, or were 1,150 rods to come in under the agreement, and those would be deducted to make up for the nuclear project which came in. This project protected and provided good jobs for Idaho, it's my understanding, and is the type of research which is needed for the fiscal health of the laboratory. I personally don't see how changing one type of waste for another is critical. If we get an earthquake and dump radioactive material into the aquifer, I don't think it'll matter if it's commercial or military. So I commend Governor Otter for forming this committee and his search for retaining good jobs and important work at the INEL. It's hard to overestimate its role as a basic foundation for much of eastern Idaho's economy. So the first conclusion of this committee should be whether they want to talk about a permanent repository for permanent waste or not, or to find one. The economic benefits of accepting large quantities of commercial fuel rods could be tremendous. Some states are going to get rich off of this because there's piles and piles of it throughout the country. And as the governor mentioned, maybe New Mexico would be the one, I don't know. But they certainly should not eliminate Yucca Mountain, which was chosen as the best spot in the entire country. But at any rate, the economic benefit could be tremendous, as I say, but we're not located geographically in a proper place to take it. I oppose it. A large percentage of Idahoans oppose it. If the committee believes this is true, then you must look elsewhere for economic sustainability for the INEL. This is not to say that modification of the agreement should not be considered, but if you want to change it substantially, be prepared for a lot of public criticism. I can tell you from past experience. So with that, would join the governor in submitting some questions. I once again commend the committee for their activities in this respect. It's a very tough question over there because we're going to see a real decline in the number of personnel needed for the cleanup. It's a marvelous institution, and we need to find some other things for it to do.
Governors,